Hello and welcome to Jonny Ross Fractional CMO. We're live on YouTube and we are live on LinkedIn. Welcome to Jonny Ross Fractional CMO, your compass in the ever-evolving landscape of marketing and branding. In today's special episode, we're thrilled to have Mitch Duckler, the visionary behind the Future Ready brand, who will be sharing cutting-edge insights straight from the minds of some of the world's top CMOs. Get ready to dive into the strategies that are defining the next era of branding and discover how your brand can not only adapt, but thrive in the face of change. Let's embark on this journey together with marketing excellence with Mitch Duckler. How are you, Mitch?
I'm doing well, Johnny. How are you?
Yeah, really good indeed. Thank you. Very excited to talk about the Future Ready brand. And in fact, I wanted to totally dive in because one of the things that you explore in your book is the critical role of purpose in branding. But I'm very aware that as more brands claim to be purpose driven, there's this growing skepticism around purpose washing and how companies genuinely integrate purpose into their brand without falling into the trap of appearing insincere or just jumping on the bandwagon. Where is that?
No, that's a great point. One of the things I talk about in the book, in that chapter on purpose, is to separate a few different concepts, right? There's at the first level, and this is all good, by the way. I'm not trying to be critical or judgmental, but at the most basic level, there's CSR, right? A corporate social responsibility platform or campaign that I'd say most companies of any size adhere to, right? And that's all well and good. The next level up, I would say, would be purpose-driven companies, right? So these are companies that not just have a CSR, but they live by this ethos, right? Whatever that purpose is, whether it's a cause or a competency or what have you, it's in their DNA, right? Everything that they do, decisions are being made consistent with that purpose. Candidates are hired based on their embracing of that purpose, et cetera, right? And then I think a level above that is not only are you purpose driven, but you define your brand, your corporate brand by that purpose, right? And that's probably the highest level of all. But especially in the latter, right? When you have a company that is purpose driven and your brand is defined by that purpose, it is so critical that it be genuine, right? And that you activate and you bring that brand to life in ways that are very consistent with your purpose, or it will be disingenuous, right? And it'll be perceived as purpose washing.
Yeah, and that's the issue, isn't it? And we're going to get on to Gen Z, which I guess is where the biggest skepticism will come from. But let's just talk about the book itself. So you interviewed, was it 48 CMOs 43. Around the world? 43. Mm-hmm. I mean, from the likes of McDonald's, PepsiCo, Wells Fargo, BMW, Salesforce, New Balance, Yum Brands. I mean, some world-class CMOs. I mean, you know, that in itself must have been quite an exercise. It took you about a year, is that right?
Yeah. It's as you might imagine. I mean, some of these folks I've known, but most I didn't, right? So as you can imagine, just even identifying them and getting on their radar and getting them to commit and then schedule and follow through was quite a task.
What were some of the common threads that you saw across some of these very large corporations from their CMOs?
What was really interesting to me, Johnny, was in particular as we got into the middle section of the book is around emerging technology. So what we're talking about is artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, extended reality. So virtual reality, augmented reality, metaverse, et cetera, and then Web3, blockchain, and so forth. I mean, these are all these are the emerging technologies that are kind of on their minds. And I was really interested to hear or to find that they're all kind of in a similar, most of them are in a similar place, and that they feel that they need to be experimenting with these technologies. And They don't have the luxury of sitting back, waiting to see how the technology evolves, which platforms are the winners and which are not. And they're all kind of taking measured steps towards experimenting and learning about it. AI is certainly further along than some of the other technologies I mentioned, right? They're actually knee deep in that now, but they're really embracing it and testing and learning and just kind of kicking the tires, if you will. And I think that that's really very smart. Another thing I think that came out of this, especially the AI portion of technology, is the belief that this has the ability to elevate the stature of marketing within the company, within the C-suite in particular. So by that I mean, if you use AI right, and you don't necessarily need to be a data scientist, but you need to understand the capabilities of AI. You need to understand what the CIO can do for you, that he or she may be your best friend as much as the head of sales, right? That if you embrace that, you really can start to own the growth agenda for your company to a much higher level than you may have been previously, because of all of the power that that the technology brings.
So, but then at the same time, I'm guessing that some of them could be wasting an absolute fortune on experimenting with AI. But I assume that's just part of the cause, and that's taken into account, for whatever loss they may have, as long as they get some big wins, it balances.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the things, some of the CMOs actually even use this verbiage. They said it's crawl, walk, run, right?
Okay.
So the crawling is, let's say we're talking about AI, so we'll stay on that for a moment. That might just be, you're experimenting with generative AI, right? So it could be as simple as using ChatGPT or an equivalent. But as you start to get comfortable with that, as you begin to realize its impact, its potential, as well as what it does well and what it doesn't, then you might want to start thinking about customizing these things, right? So it's not just the off the shelf, but it's customized chat GPT. And then for certain things, especially like mission critical functions within your company, you might want to bring it in house, right? And actually start building your own AI, in this case, generative AI infrastructure, right? Your own GPT, if you will, so that you have it in house and it's proprietary and so forth. You don't necessarily need to go to that, nor would you want to go to that final step, right out of the gate, right? You kind of work your way up to it gradually.
Did they show any concern around privacy and how much they would be sharing with the likes of ChatGPT? I mean, you're talking about some of the world's biggest brands.
Yes, and absolutely, and they are certainly the most, in most cases, the most risk averse, right? So. And here they were a little bit all over the board. I talked to some of the CMOs who are and some of it just is because they're in regulated industries and they have to be, but others are just in very risk averse cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of concern over a few things. I mean, certainly privacy is one of them, but also just even data integrity. Is the data that they're getting, is it reliable? Are there biases, systemic biases in the data that is being generated by it? Ownership rights, right? Who owns the intellectual property that's actually being created by it? Are you violating copyright? So yeah, there's a whole host of legal concerns that are on their minds and risk that they need to be willing to undertake.
And did you get any feeling that compliance and legal were suppressing some of what marketing could do, or is that just that there's ways of dealing with that?
So again, yeah, I think yes, there's concern, but also the realization that you can't just reject it
Ignore
outright
it.
and say, you know what, it's not for me, or
Yeah.
I'm going to wait 10 years, until all the kinks are out. They're kind of proceeding cautiously, right? And almost to a T. It's interesting when I talked about the topics with the CMOs, like there's 9 topics, right? A chapter on each in the book. which ones would you like to talk about? Most of them said, oh, we're not really doing much with AI. And yet when I started, probing, I'm like, you're doing a lot more than you realize and a lot more than most, right? So, they kind of get it that you need to proceed, but proceed cautiously. I would say, that data privacy and regulation, I think, is one of the big concerns. Another, I think, is a concern, especially in the area of generative AI and content marketing, is around just losing kind of creativity and losing the emotion, right, and the human touch. Especially as it relates to content. And those are all just some of the concerns and the watch outs that are on their minds, but certainly none of that is stopping them from using the technology and experimenting with it in a big way.
So you typically work with large organizations, it might be the senior directors or VPs of marketing or brand or etc. One of the things that I'm wondering, and having written the book, what do you use to define exactly what a future ready brand means?
Well, I think it's really it kind of goes across all three sections of the book. I think that there are societal implications for brands, right? So we talked earlier about purpose, right? And the role that purpose plays, whether it's just as simple as having a CSR platform or actually defining your brand by a purpose. I think it is something you need to think about because it is increasingly important to consumers. It's nothing new, right? Purpose has been around for a long time, purpose branding. But I would argue that it's only increasing in importance because of the generations that are really now dominating the marketplace, right? Millennials and Gen Z. So I think that's really important to kind of figure out where you are, like to what extent you are purpose driven, to what extent should your brand or is your brand defined by that purpose, and so forth. The other thing I think, again, being future ready in that societal bucket is Gen Z, right? And they are the dominant, going to be the dominant generation from a commercial and marketplace perspective for a number of years. So really understanding the nature of them, what drives them, what motivates them. A little bit I talk about in the book is this notion that they are a little bit schizophrenic in that there's really two segments of Gen Z. There's the me and the we, right? And the me is very much defined by individuality and self-expression. The we, which I think is what most people associate with Gen Z, is very socially conscious. They're very aware of causes such as ESG and DE&I. So I think, just understanding that and how you need to be able to relate to them and to market to them is really critical and part of what's making your brand future ready. And then the other side is the technology, right? And just realizing that these emerging technologies, which AI, I would argue, is beyond emerging, right? It's almost here, right? But even if you look at extended reality and Web3 and blockchain and NFTs and so forth, these are as disruptive now as the internet was 20, 25 years ago. And it really is, we are starting to see some fairly seismic shifts in marketing and in brand building and the relationships that marketers have with consumers, much like we did in the dawn of the digital age.
You mentioned societal there, and I'm guessing that the biggest influence from what you're saying in society is Gen Z then. And you talked about the we and the me, the two different sides. How do organizations market to both different sides at the same time? How do they navigate that? And because to some extent, whilst there's lots of similarities, they do have very different desires and wants. So I don't know if there's any examples you might have or thoughts on how they deal with it.
Yeah, I think there are certainly some differences, right? And where there are differences, I think, again, we I mean, it's those could arguably be polar opposites, but there are also some commonalities and things that they have that they share, right? And I think one, and it goes back to this the issue we just talked about, which around purpose, which is this regardless of whether they're kind of a me or a we, they have a desire for authenticity and transparency, whether they're me or we. So, and that you're seeing that play out in the way brands are marketing today, right? This shift from influencers to creators, from content provided by marketers to user-generated content, homespun content, if you will, and things that aren't necessarily polished and perfect, right? But they're just real and authentic. And I think that is something that, regardless of who you are within Gen Z and whether you skew more towards this we snapshot or me snapshot, that is something that I think is that they share. Another is this desire for connection and experience. I think Gen Z, again, regardless of whether you're in that me or we camp, they really do feel or they really do seek out experiences. So, kind of mixing up the commerce a little bit, pop-up stores, things like that, just making the experience, whether it's retail or other, more immersive, I think is something that definitely appeals to this generation, much more so, I think, even than other generations before them.
Is it enough of a reason for producing more sub brands within a portfolio, or is that, or is the whole me we that's not a good enough reason to have a separate brand?
The sense I got is no, they're not necessarily separate brands. I think it's just, and again, because there are a lot of commonalities, it's not like these are two dramatically different generations, right? It's just, I think it's really more around how you bring the brand to life, how you express it, how you activate it, that might be a little bit different. It's not that you need like a me brand and a we brand, right? They're not that dramatically different. So yeah, that's a generalization, but that's kind of the sense I got from talking to the CMOs about Gen Z, as well as just my experience working with clients on it.
We talked about purpose earlier on, but one of the things that is important for most organizations is profit. And so I'm just wondering how brands can effectively balance this with the drive for profit.
Yeah. So one of the things, again, in the purpose chapter I talk about is the triple bottom line, which you may have heard of, right? So it's profit, people, and planet. And they're all important, right? It used to just be about profit, right? And it's hey, you're in business for one reason, and that's to increase shareholder value, right? To make money. While that certainly is not going away, right? That is a real goal, objective, mission, whatever you want to call it, and will be for forever. It's no longer sufficient, right? There's other things that matter, and that's where kind of the people and the planet come in, the other two P's of that triple bottom line. And the really good news, though, is that a lot of the longitudinal research that was done, this isn't my research, right? This research I leveraged, though, as part of the chapter in the book, is that companies that have a focus on purpose, whether it's a cause or a competency or what have you, or regardless of what that purpose is, right? But they tend to do better financially, right? Their income, right? Their profitability over the long run, over the long haul, is actually larger than those companies that are not considered to be purpose driven. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. And in fact, it's not. It's not like, hey, are we in business to make money, or are we in business to promote our purpose? It's both. And when you do one, the other follows. And again, that's what research was showing too, right? And so that's good news. Another similar point is, which I find kind of interesting, is, when I started out in the world of brand, and this is back in the early 1990s, some of these issues, like sustainability, and green, right? The green movement. Those were things that were starting to get on people's radar, right? And they were saying it's important, but when you did market research, people would say it's important, but they would never pay 1 penny more for it, right? Now that's not the case. Now what we're starting to see is that consumers, and again, whether it's green or another purpose, consumers are willing to pay, in some cases, up to 20-25% more for an equivalent product if they embrace the purpose that company stands for. So again, that kind of goes hand in hand with this notion that the two aren't necessarily separate. You can be profitable and purpose-driven.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point indeed, and there has absolutely been a swing from consumers to start paying for this, without question.
Yeah, it's easy to say it's important. It's another to say I'll pay more for it.
Right? Yeah, totally. This, if you're listening or watching right now, this is the Jonny Ross Fractional CMO. We are live on Instagram for the first time as well, which is great. So if you're joining us there, welcome. You may be listening to the podcast afterwards. You're just as welcome as well. We're with Mitch Duckler, the author of The Future Ready Brand. We're exploring what brands need to do to be future ready, especially from the insights of all the CMOs that you've spoken to from these worldwide large organizations, famous names that we've all heard of. What I'm wondering is as you've spoken to the CMOs and you've got clearly technology, as you've said, is a very large part of this. I'm interested in how it's currently impacting marketing in general, and what you're seeing.
Yeah, so what I would say, especially artificial intelligence, maybe to a lesser extent, some of the other emerging technologies, are driving more hyper personalization, right? So I think that's when you think about AI's capabilities and its ability to classify much more finely and predict much more accurately. It's bringing about this dream of Peppers and Rogers back in the early 90s, right? The one-to-one future, which at that point was a pipe dream, right? It's that you could actually start crafting your brand and your marketing and your offer to each individual customer. But that's in a sense what AI is allowing you to do. It's no longer do you have a segmentation schema of 5 or 6 segments, right? And you pick 1 or 2. I mean, you're starting to talk about 1,000 different segments or clusters. And because AI is able to parse data out and classify much more finely and predict much more accurately, it's really dramatically different, right? It is almost making this notion of one-to-one marketing more of a reality than just a pipe dream.
And how's that integrated in sort of, you've got your online and offline worlds. I'm assuming that online that's a lot easier to do than offline. Are you seeing anything happening to bring those two closer?
Yes. So one of the CMOs I spoke with, the CMO from Sephora was a great example where they kind of merged online and offline. So you think about Sephora, they're cosmetic, right? And they have retail. I'm not sure how many 5,000 stores I want to say.
Whatever they are doing it very well, because all I have is my 10-year-old daughter constantly telling me how I need to take her to a Sephora shop. So,
oh really?
So yeah, and she's on Snapchat, she's on TikTok, and of course we monitor, and of course we only allow certain times a day and all of that stuff. But my God, they are doing their job well, because that is all I ever hear. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to give in at some point.
Yeah, it is. It's a great brand. It's a brand I have a lot of respect for, and I'm sure he'll love if I get back to him and tell him about your daughter. He'll be thrilled to hear that. But if you think about that business, what they're able to do in store is, understand, a sales agent could be working with a customer and asking a lot of questions, about their life, where they're from, their lifestyle, what sort of climate, right, are they exposed to? What are their activities? What kind of skin tone do they have? Do they have oily or dry skin? Their complexion. Are they interested in SPF or not? Right, all these different, and then actually in front of the consumer, right? Just be putting this into AI and say, okay, out of these thousands of products, here are 3 or 4 we'd recommend. And in a nanosecond, right? And it's not only fast, but it's probably a lot more accurate and predictive because it is so analytical and data driven.
Based on data.
And then, oh, by the way, they're talking about how they can use augmented reality. If you don't want to try the product on, well, we can show you what it looks like through AR, right? And your face, your exact reflection and what it will look like with this particular cosmetic. I mean, so yeah, it is blending both online and offline.
Which is, so important to engage Gen Z.
Yeah,
without question. Yeah.
And that's another, going back to the earlier point about how immersive and how experiential is that interaction, right? Much more so than it has been in the past.
You talked about experimental marketing there. How important is that as part of the mix?
Experiential is definitely becoming more important, and I think a lot of it is because for a couple of reasons. It's like I said, some of it's just being driven by demand and preferences and trends, right? And that's what consumers want. But then the emerging technologies that we haven't talked as much about, we talk a lot about AI, but extended reality and virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. These are things that, especially I think augmented reality, are having the ability to make experiences that might be mundane much more immersive. So even though this was one of the interesting dynamics that during this interview process, right, the last 15 months or so, a Metaverse kind of took a dive, right? There was so much hype and so much build up around its potential, and then it kind of it took a little bit of a nosedive in terms of maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of this. The goggles aren't as great as they need to be, the experiences and what. And there is some wait and see about Metaverse, right? And this Web 2.5, right, where it's the Metaverse, but it's not the Oculus Metaverse. But what is real and present today is those extended realities, whether it's Metaverse based or not, especially augmented reality in retail environments, is really changing the experience and making it much more immersive.
So we've talked about how technologies are impacting marketing in general, and we sort of stepped on this a tiny bit earlier in terms of specifically content. So let's just talk about how it's impacting content and whether where that's going really.
Yeah, it's impacting content in a lot of ways. I think the way that's most evident or most familiar to people is in generation, right? Content generation, right? So that's ChatGPT and its ability and the like, and its ability to actually create long form in some cases very long form content with decent reliability and quality and in lightning fast time, right? But one of the things that I do highlight in the book is that it's really impacting content marketing from more than just that, right? It's impacting the way content is researched, right? So that includes like segmenting audiences or generating outlines, brainstorming topics, right? That's kind of on the front end of content. Then it's doing the actual creation in some cases. So that's the generative AI and the chat GPTs and so forth. It's also helping to personalize content. So think about versioning, right? So how do you actually take a piece of content and make it much more relevant for a particular segment or audience, right? Maybe it's more specific to a vertical or an industry or to a geography, or it's actually being translated into 7 different languages, right? So that's the personalization. And then it's also helping you to curate and optimize. So go out and find content, especially user-generated content, that is the most relevant for your brand. And then optimize it, obviously make it so that it is suitable for your brand, so it's on brand, et cetera. So it's not just, again, ChatGPT and the the generative side of AI, I think is getting the most press, if you will, about for AI and content, but I really think it's impacting much more.
And what's your perception on how much of the content we're seeing from some of these large organizations in terms of what's AI generated and what's human generated? And do you believe that there is going to be a continued move to AI generated content?
I think it will. A lot of the issues that I brought up earlier are real, right? Some of the obstacles, right? And that can include data integrity, systemic biases, hallucinations, right? In some cases, the AI doesn't have an answer, so it makes it up, right? And then you're like, oh my gosh, and it sounds real, right? So one of the things that and I think this is fairly standard, but one of the things that I heard from a lot of the CMOs is they trust it a lot more for short form content than they do for long form. That the longer form content is where you start to run into trouble, the hallucinations, et cetera, the risk of going off brand or biases being interjected. So, if you're, I want to say maybe to 500 to 800 word pieces, right? They're feeling reasonably confident as long, again, you can't just take it and run with it. But if you use it to kind of, hypercharge what you're doing, right? And to maybe save an hour to do something in 1 hour versus 2 or 3 hours, that's huge. So yeah, I think that's the biggest use. Social media, I think I think I read somewhere where 70% of posts are at least somewhat AI influenced, if not generated. So again, it's the shorter form where I think there's more confidence with it. Longer form, I think there's a long way to go before people are going to start trusting it with meaningful thought leadership, longer form content pieces.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I think of in the UK, Asda, which were part of Walmart, and I've seen some of their sponsored Facebook ads very recently and Instagram ads, and having as a user of AI on a regular basis, I'm looking at this ad and I'm thinking, there's no question in my mind that has been written by AI, by ChatGPT. But then I question myself, and I wonder, have humans learned from that and are mimicking it, or have they just totally gone with whatever ChatGPT's come up with? But looking at it, I'm looking at it thinking that has definitely originated from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And even as what I consider to myself to be an expert in terms of understanding the content, the output from ChatGPT, even I am looking at that thinking, I'm not sure. Would a large corp just rely purely on that, or
No.
and that's the
No, and nobody at least nobody I talked to in these interviews was, right. They're saying they're using it very. The greatest quote came from Jill Kramer, who's the CMO of Accenture. She said, "AI is an amplifier of human talent," and that was spot on. She's saying there are things that AI does incredibly well, right, and it can be, obviously very analytical. It can crunch data. It can process, a large amount of information, et cetera, et cetera. But what it can't do is it can't interject emotion, and it can't be creative. And that's what humans will always need to do, right? No matter how good AI gets, those two things, like creativity and emotion, I just think are inherently human and will always be the job of the marketer. But her point is AI does a lot of these other things for you so well and so efficiently and effectively that it allows you to do what you do well, right? And to focus on that. You have more time to be creative. You have more time to be strategic, to inject emotion, human emotion, because AI is taking some of the laborious and analytical burden off of you. I think that's probably the best way to think about it. If you want to turn your content marketing effort over to AI, good luck with that, right? That's a recipe for disaster. But if you use it as a tool, as an aid to improving that function, there's a lot of potential there.
Mitch, if you're a senior leader in branding or marketing in a large corp, what would you be suggesting that you should be challenging yourself with, in the next few days, next week, having listened to this, having read the book, of course? What would be the things that you need to be thinking about and really considering to make happen?
Yeah, there's a couple. One of which I think we already touched on a little bit earlier, but it's actually, you need to begin to experiment with some of these if you're not already. Some of these emerging technologies. Take a chance, could create a pilot, a scrum, if you will, and just test it out in a low risk way if necessary, but start experimenting with what AI, what XR, even Web3 or blockchain, which we haven't talked about really as much today. These are things that I think you can experiment with in a relatively lower cost way and lower risk way. So if you're not already doing that, I think you need to, because those are only going to become more dominant in the future. I think the other is another common theme that came out from a lot of these interviews was this notion that control is increasingly being surrendered from marketer to consumer, right? And we began to see that a lot with the emergence of the internet, especially with social media, and it's continuing now with a lot of marketing tactics such as influencer marketing, right? And we talked a lot about the shift from influencers, which are a little bit more controlled by marketing, versus creators, which are much more authentic and real, if you will. And one of the things that they all said is, wow, we've come to realize that we need to surrender control to the people who understand the consumers themselves, and to the people, in this case, influencers or creators, who know their audiences even better than they do. And that's a real hard thing for marketers to do. They tend to be by nature a little bit more type A and control oriented. But they said, we've noticed the best result. And these are some of the Fortune 50 even companies that we're talking about, that are using influencers, saying, you know what, we get out of their way. Yes, we have guidelines. We do manage them. We choose them very, very, very carefully. That's critical, right? You got to make sure you know who you're aligning with. But once we do, we need to kind of take off the guards, right? And let them do what they do well, because they know their followers. They know their audience better than we do. And as long as we help them understand our brand, they can figure out what to do with them. But that's not typical marketing, right? And certainly from when I was starting out, it's a very different mindset.
Yeah, because you're too worried about protecting the brand and following the brand guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, what you've just said there is it resonates so well, and it's so true. They know better than you do, and
that's why you're hiring them, right?
and as you said,
yeah.
It's about making sure that you choose and select the right person. So fantastic. We could talk a lot more. I did want to get into influencers, but we've run out of time. It's brilliant. Listen, if someone wanted to contact you, where's the best place to find you? Where do you hang out? Obviously, there's the Future Ready brand book. Where should we be going to buy the book?
So the book you can pre-order it now. The book is officially released on May 14th. It is on Amazon. It's also on our website. So my company is Full Surge, and you can email me at mduckler, MDUCKLER @fullsurge.com. And you can also see the book there and more information about the book, and even pre-order it there as well. Also, feel free to follow me or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Send me an invite. Would love to hear from you.
All of the links and contact details will be in the show notes as well. So if anyone's listening or watching right now, please do check the show notes for all of the contact details. I forgot that it's pre-order because you've very kindly sent me a pre-version, so I've already read it. I've forgotten that it's still not launched, so that's brilliant. So yeah, I would highly advise to get a pre-order in. Because it's full of fantastic information. Mitch, thank you very much indeed. And if you've been watching or listening, this has been Jonny Ross Fractional CMO. Thanks for joining us, and we will look forward to see you all soon. Take care. Cheers, Mitch.